What happens when ambition collides with ethics? And a chance encounter sparks a partnership that could redefine an empire. Meet Sophie Carter, a sharp and determined receptionist who's unexpectedly thrust into the world of high-stakes corporate power. At Blake Industries, a company rocked by scandal and doubt, CEO Logan Blake must fight to save his reputation and legacy. When Sophie becomes his unlikely ally, their journey reveals secrets, challenges their beliefs, and forges an unbreakable bond. But when betrayal strikes and their trust is tested, will their growing connection survive the storm, or will the weight of their choices pull them apart? Before we dive in, comment below where you're watching from and share your thoughts on what makes a true leader. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more powerful, inspiring stories like this one. Now, let's begin the story of Sophie and Logan, a tale of resilience, transformation, and a love forged through adversity. Logan Blake didn't believe in mistakes, at least not ones he couldn't fix. Sitting at the head of his expansive desk in Blake Industries' Manhattan headquarters, he scrolled through the latest headlines on his tablet. Each headline cut deeper than the last. Blake Industries under fire for alleged labor violations. Whistleblower reports sparks investor exodus. CEO Logan Blake remains silent amid growing controversy. Silent? Logan thought bitterly. I've been working nonstop to fix this. The truth was, fixing it wasn't simple. The whistleblower's accusations were damning, and while some of the claims predated his tenure, Logan wasn't blameless. He'd always prioritized efficiency and growth, trusting his managers to handle the details. Now those details were unraveling his empire. The office intercom beeped, breaking his thoughts. "Mr. Blake, your assistant is here." His receptionist's voice chimed, cool and professional. "Send him in," Logan said, straightening his tie. Greg Harris entered, a man as dependable as a Swiss watch and just as formal. He carried a leather-bound planner and an expression that said this wasn't a social call. "Good morning, Greg. Tell me you have something useful," Logan said, gesturing for him to sit. "I wish I did," Greg replied, placing the planner on the desk. "We've lost another investor. That brings the total to 6 this quarter." Logan pinched the bridge of his nose. "Who this time?" "Wendell Partners. They cited a lack of confidence in leadership direction." Logan swore under his breath. "Do they understand what pulling out now does to their portfolio?" "They don't care," Greg said. "They're more concerned with optics than logic." Logan leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. "What about the gala? Is everything ready?" "The venue is set, the guest list finalized." "But there's a problem," Greg said hesitantly. "What now?" "Camille Harper canceled." Logan frowned. Camille, his head of communications, was supposed to be his partner for the evening. Her polished demeanor and charm had a way of smoothing over tense conversations with investors. "Why?" "Family emergency," Greg said. "She called this morning." Logan exhaled sharply, irritation flaring. "Do we have a backup?" Greg hesitated. "Not unless you want to reschedule." "And?" "Out of the question," Logan cut him off. Rescheduling would signal weakness, something he couldn't afford. "Find someone else." "Someone else?" Greg echoed. "You mean from the team?" Logan's gaze drifted toward the glass wall of his office, overlooking the lobby below. His eyes landed on Sophie Carter, the receptionist. She was organizing a stack of delivery boxes, her movements efficient and deliberate. Her auburn hair was pulled back, her tailored blazer suggesting professionalism beyond her station. Logan tapped the desk with a decisive finger. "Her!" Greg followed his gaze. "Sophie? She's the receptionist." "And she's competent," Logan said. "Bring her here." Greg looked skeptical, but nodded. "As you wish." Sophie Carter smoothed her blazer as the elevator doors opened to the executive floor. She'd worked as a receptionist at Blake Industries for 3 years, long enough to know how things worked. She wasn't sure why she'd been summoned to the CEO's office, but she suspected it wasn't for a promotion. "Mr. Blake will see you now," Greg said, holding the door open. Sophie stepped inside, the spacious office overwhelming her senses. The walls were lined with bookshelves, the view of Manhattan dazzling. Logan Blake stood behind his desk, his sharp suit tailored to perfection. He gestured for her to sit. "Sophie Carter, correct?" Logan asked, wasting no time on pleasantries. "Yes, sir," she replied, keeping her voice steady. Logan studied her, his expression unreadable. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years, Sophie said. "And in that time, have you ever attended a high-profile corporate event?" "No, sir," Sophie replied, confused. "You're about to," Logan said. "The investor gala is tomorrow night, and I need you to accompany me." Sophie blinked. "Me? Yes. Your job will be to smile, look professional, and say as little as possible." The words stung, but Sophie masked her reaction. "Why me?" Logan's tone was matter-of-fact. "You're presentable, capable, and available. That's all that matters." Sophie clenched her hands in her lap. She wasn't sure if this was an insult or an opportunity. "Understood," she said finally. Logan nodded. "Greg will arrange for appropriate attire. Be ready at 7 p.m. sharp." The Grand Imperial Ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers, its marble floors reflecting the elegance of the evening. Sophie stepped out of the car in an emerald green gown, her hair styled in soft waves. She felt out of place, but held her head high. Logan offered his arm. "Let's make this quick and painless." "Of course," Sophie said, her tone neutral. Inside, the room was a whirlwind of conversation and clinking glasses. Logan moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. Sophie stayed by his side, her posture straight, her smile polite. Logan Blake, an investor, greeted him, extending a hand. "And who is this lovely young woman?" "This is Sophie Carter," Logan said briefly, offering no further explanation. Sophie felt the man's gaze linger. "Ms. Carter, what do you think of Blake Industries' current challenges?" Logan tensed, but Sophie didn't falter. "Every challenge is an opportunity to improve," she said, her voice steady. The investor raised an eyebrow, impressed. Interesting perspective. As the evening wore on, Sophie found herself fielding more questions. She spoke carefully, aware of Logan's watchful eyes. By the end of the night, several investors seemed genuinely intrigued by her insights. The car ride home was silent until Logan finally spoke. "You ignored my instructions," he said coldly. "I answered their questions," Sophie replied. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You drew unnecessary attention," Logan snapped. Sophie turned to him, her voice firm. "Maybe attention is exactly what this company needs right now." Logan's jaw tightened. "Don't overstep, Ms. Carter." "Understood," Sophie said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. The next morning, whispers filled the office. Sophie caught snippets of conversations her name mentioned alongside words like GALA and investors. Later, Logan summoned her to his office. "The investors were impressed," he said, his tone begrudging. "Thank you, sir," Sophie said. "Don't let it go to your head," Logan added. "And don't assume this change anything." Sophie left his office with a small smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The lobby of Blake Industries buzzed with more energy than usual. Sophie felt the weight of stares and whispered conversations as she walked to her desk. The gala had become the office's main topic of discussion, and her unexpected appearance with Logan had clearly not gone unnoticed. "Good morning, Sophie," a voice said behind her. She turned to see Mia, one of the marketing assistants, smiling curiously. "Morning, Mia." "So," Mia began, leaning in conspiratorially. "You went to the gala with Logan Blake?" Sophie hesitated. "It wasn't personal, if that's what you're thinking. He needed someone last minute, and I happened to be available." "Still," Mia said with a grin, "walking into the Grand Imperial with him? That's the kind of thing people notice." Sophie forced a polite smile. She didn't want to be noticed. She wanted to be respected. Sophie's reprieve from attention didn't last long. That afternoon, Greg appeared at her desk with a clipboard. "Mr. Blake wants you in the boardroom," Greg said, glancing at his watch. Sophie felt her stomach tighten. "What for?" Greg shrugged. "Something about feedback reports. Just be ready to present." When Sophie entered the boardroom, she was greeted by a table of senior executives, all seated in a semicircle like judges at a trial. Logan stood at the head of the table, his expression as sharp as his tailored suit. "Sophie," Logan said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Take a seat." She obeyed, gripping her notebook tightly. "As you all know," Logan began, addressing the room, "the morale at Blake Industries has taken a hit lately. We need to reestablish trust, not just with our investors, but with our employees. He turned to Sophie. You've been working on employee feedback. Share your findings. Sophie froze for half a second. She'd been collecting feedback for weeks, but she hadn't expected to present it to the board. She took a deep breath and began, her voice steady despite the nerves. Our employees want to feel heard, she said, flipping through her notes. Many believe that decisions are made at the top without considering their input. They're looking for transparency, acknowledgement, and opportunities to grow within the company. Specifics? One of the executives asked, his tone skeptical. Over 60% of surveyed employees feel they lack upward mobility, Sophie replied, maintaining eye contact. And 45% feel their contributions aren't recognized. The room was quiet as Sophie finished. Logan's gaze lingered on her for a moment before he turned to the others. Well, Logan prompted. I've seen worse ideas, Marcus Green muttered, leaning back in his chair. Let's be clear, Logan said, his tone firm. This isn't just about ideas. It's about execution. Sophie, I want you to draft a proposal for an engagement program that addresses these concerns. Present it by Friday. Sophie nodded, her mind already racing. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Sophie juggled her usual receptionist duties with late nights drafting the proposal Logan had requested. Mia stopped by her desk one afternoon. You've been working like crazy. You okay? I'm fine, Sophie said, though the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. This is a big opportunity, and I don't want to blow it. Mia smiled. You've got this. If anyone can prove they belong in that boardroom, it's you. By Friday morning, Sophie felt as prepared as she could be. She stood outside the boardroom, clutching her notes, while Logan reviewed emails on his phone. Are you ready? He asked without looking up. As ready as I'll ever be, Sophie replied. Logan's gaze shifted to her. Don't just be ready. Be confident. If you don't believe in what you're presenting, neither will they. Sophie nodded, her determination solidifying. Inside the boardroom, Sophie delivered her presentation with poise. She outlined a program designed to increase employee engagement through mentorship opportunities, regular feedback sessions, and internal promotions. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment before Marcus spoke up. You want us to spend money on mentorship programs when we're already cutting costs? Marcus asked, his tone skeptical. Sophie met his gaze. It's not an expense. It's an investment. Happier employees mean higher retention and better productivity. The returns will outweigh the costs. Logan watched her closely, his expression unreadable. By the end of the meeting, the board voted to pilot the program in one department. As the executives filed out, Logan lingered, his eyes meeting Sophie's. Well done, he said simply. Thank you, Sophie replied, suppressing a smile. The pilot program launched in the marketing department, and the results were promising. Employee satisfaction scores improved within weeks, and productivity showed a modest but measurable increase. Sophie's success didn't go unnoticed. Logan began involving her in more meetings, and investors started to ask for her input. But not everyone was pleased. Marcus cornered Sophie in the break room one afternoon. Don't get too comfortable, he said, his tone dripping with disdain. You're still just a receptionist playing executive. Sophie's jaw tightened. And yet I'm the one making things happen, she said calmly before walking away. Logan called Sophie into his office late one evening. Close the door, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Sophie sat, her curiosity piqued. I've been reviewing the program's results, Logan began. It's working. Sophie allowed herself a small smile. I'm glad to hear that. But, Logan continued, there's more to be done. The investors want a full rollout, and the board is starting to listen. I need someone to spearhead this, and I want it to be you. Sophie blinked, stunned. Me? You've proven you're capable, Logan said. But this isn't just about you. It's about whether we can rebuild this company together. Sophie felt a surge of determination. I'm ready. Look, I know that. Then let's get to work. Sophie's promotion to oversee the employee engagement rollout brought her into the spotlight and into the crosshairs of her detractors. Marcus Green's veiled hostility grew more apparent, and whispers of resentment circulated among some senior executives. She's just a receptionist who got lucky, one executive muttered during a coffee break. Sophie, Overhearing the comment, clenched her fists but kept walking. She didn't have time to dwell on petty remarks. Her focus was on proving that she belonged at the table. Logan, meanwhile, began to notice the ripple effects of Sophie's growing influence. Investors who had once been wary now seemed cautiously optimistic, and employees were responding well to the new initiatives. "You've got their attention," Logan said during a private meeting in his office. "Now don't lose it." "Was that a compliment?" Sophie teased. "Don't let it go to your head," Logan replied, though the faint smirk on his face betrayed his approval. The engagement program expanded to the operations department, where resistance was strongest. Several managers were openly critical, citing concerns about costs and practicality. During a tense meeting with department heads, Marcus Green interrupted Sophie mid-presentation. "You're asking us to prioritize morale over output," he said, his tone cutting. "That's not how business works." Sophie kept her voice calm but firm. "It's not about choosing one over the other. Engaged employees are more productive. The numbers back this up." "Numbers can be manipulated," Marcus shot back. Logan, seated at the head of the table, finally spoke. "If you have an alternative solution, Marcus, we're all ears. Otherwise, let's allow Sophie to finish." The room fell silent, and Sophie continued her presentation. But the tension lingered, and she knew Marcus wasn't finished. As the program gained traction, Sophie found an unexpected ally in Benjamin Clark, a progressive investor known for championing ethical business practices. Benjamin reached out after reviewing the quarterly results. "Ms. Carter," he said during a phone call, "your initiatives are exactly what this company needs. I'd like to meet and discuss how we can support your efforts further." Sophie agreed, and the two met for coffee the next day. Benjamin's enthusiasm bolstered her confidence, but she couldn't help but notice Logan's guarded reaction when she mentioned the meeting. "Be careful with Clark," Logan warned later. "He's an idealist, and idealists can be unpredictable." "Maybe that's exactly what we need right now," Sophie replied, her tone challenging. Logan didn't respond, but the unspoken tension between them was palpable. To address lingering resistance among senior staff, Logan organized a leadership retreat at a secluded lake house. The goal was to foster collaboration, but the atmosphere was anything but friendly. Sophie arrived late after wrapping up a department meeting, finding the executives gathered around a roaring fire. Marcus was holding court, his criticisms of the program thinly veiled as concerns. Sophie stepped in, cutting him off mid-sentence. "If you have specific concerns, Marcus, let's address them directly. Vague complaints don't solve problems." The group fell silent, surprised by her boldness. Logan, watching from the corner, smirked. Later that evening, a storm rolled in, forcing everyone to stay overnight. Sophie found herself alone with Logan in the common area, the sound of rain pattering against the windows. "Impressive takedown earlier," Logan said, sipping a glass of whiskey. "Marcus isn't the problem," Sophie replied. "He's just the loudest voice. The others won't take this program seriously until you show them that you fully support it." Logan leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're right, but I can't hold their hands. Leadership means stepping up, even when it's uncomfortable." Sophie met his gaze, her tone softening. "Then lead by example." For a moment, the storm outside was the only sound. "You don't make this easy, Sophie," Logan said, a hint of a smile on his lips. "Neither do you," she replied. The following morning, the retreat wrapped up with a tense brainstorming session. Despite the friction, Sophie managed to get several executives to commit to trial phases of the program in their departments. Logan drove Sophie back to the city, the silence between them heavy but not uncomfortable. As they reached her apartment, Logan parked and turned to her. "You're good at this," he said quietly. Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Is that another compliment?" Logan chuckled, but his expression grew serious. "You push me in ways no one else does. It's unsettling." "Maybe you need to be pushed," Sophie said, her voice softer now. Before either of them could think better of it, Logan leaned in and kissed her. It was brief but electric, leaving them both momentarily stunned. Logan began, but Sophie opened the car door, cutting him off. "Good night, Logan," she said, stepping out and walking quickly toward her building. The kiss lingered in Sophie's mind, distracting her at work. Logan, too, seemed out of sorts, though he masked it with his usual stoicism. During a one-on-one meeting to discuss the next phase of the program, Logan finally addressed the elephant in the room. "About the other night," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "It was a mistake," Sophie said quickly, though her tone lacked conviction. "Was it?" Logan asked, his eyes searching hers. Sophie didn't respond, and the tension between them grew unbearable. "We can't let this affect the work," Logan said finally. "Agreed," Sophie replied, though her heart ached at the distance the words created. As the engagement program expanded to international branches, Sophie encountered resistance from local executives. One branch in Europe in particular seemed determined to undermine her efforts. Reports were delayed, data was falsified, and progress stalled. During a conference call with the branch leaders, Sophie's frustration boiled over. "If this continues, we'll conduct an audit," she said firmly, "and I'll ensure that every department is held accountable." The threat was met with silence, but Sophie noticed a shift in the days that followed. Reports began arriving on time, and compliance improved. Logan, observing from afar, couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and concern. Sophie's determination was unmatched, but her growing influence made her a target. Back in New York, Sophie presented the program's international results to the board. Despite the challenges, the data showed measurable improvements in morale and productivity. Logan sat beside her, his expression neutral but his presence reassuring. As Sophie concluded her presentation, the room erupted in applause. Even Marcus offered begrudging praise. After the meeting, Logan pulled Sophie aside. "You were incredible," he said. "Thanks," Sophie replied, her smile genuine. As they stood there, the tension between them crackled. Logan reached for her hand, but Sophie stepped back. "This, whatever it is, it can't happen," she said, her voice breaking slightly. Logan nodded, though his eyes betrayed his frustration. "I know." The morning after her successful board presentation, Sophie found herself in an unfamiliar position. A sense of accomplishment lingered, but she couldn't ignore the unease of unfinished business professionally and personally. Logan's presence in the meeting had been both a support and a reminder of the tension they had left unresolved. Mia, the ever-curious marketing assistant, appeared at Sophie's desk during a rare lull. "You're practically glowing," Mia said, leaning against the desk with a knowing grin. "It's just the fluorescent lights," Sophie replied, keeping her tone light. "Come on, Sophie. The board loved your pitch yesterday. Even Marcus didn't bite your head off." Sophie shrugged. "It was just one presentation. There's still a lot to prove." "Modesty doesn't suit you," Mia teased. "You should celebrate this win." Sophie smiled but remained guarded. The stakes were still too high to relax. Logan summoned Sophie to his office later that day. She stepped in to find him pacing, an energy in the air that hinted at bad news. "What's going on?" Sophie asked. "Marcus is stirring the pot again," Logan said, handing her a report. "He's been meeting privately with several board members, questioning your ability to lead the program." Sophie scanned the document, her pulse quickening. "Why would he?" "Because you're a threat," Logan interrupted. "And Marcus doesn't like threats." Sophie set the report down, her jaw tightening. "Let him try. The results speak for themselves." "I admire your confidence," Logan said, his tone softening. "But be careful. Marcus plays dirty." "Noted," Sophie said, meeting his gaze. For a moment, the room was silent, charged with unspoken words. Then Logan straightened, his businesslike demeanor returning. "Let's focus on the next rollout," he said. "We can't afford missteps." The engagement program's expansion to Europe had brought some success, but it also exposed deeper challenges. Several branches resisted the changes, citing cultural differences and logistical concerns. Sophie decided to travel to the European headquarters to address the issues directly. Logan, ever wary of potential fallout, insisted on joining her. "I don't need a babysitter," Sophie said when he informed her of his decision. Logan smirked. "Consider it a safety net." The flight to Paris was quiet, both of them absorbed in their respective work. But as they settled into the European office, the cracks in their partnership began to show. The European executives were polite but guarded, their skepticism evident during the first meeting. This program might work in New York, one manager said, his tone clipped. But our teams operate differently here. They don't respond to the same strategies. I understand your concerns, Sophie replied, maintaining her composure. But engagement isn't about geography. It's about human connection. The room fell silent, and Logan watched her closely. She handled the pushback with poise, but he could see the strain beneath the surface. Later, in the office kitchen, Logan approached her. "You held your own in there," he said, pouring a cup of coffee. "Thanks," Sophie said, her voice weary. "But," Logan prompted. Sophie sighed. "I can't shake the feeling that no matter what I do, it's never enough." Logan leaned against the counter, his expression unusually soft. "It's not about being enough. It's about being relentless. You're already proving that." After another long day of meetings, Sophie and Logan decided to grab dinner at a quiet cafe near the Seine. The conversation started light discussions of Parisian architecture and cultural quirks, but eventually turned personal. "Why do you care so much about this company?" Logan asked, his tone curious rather than challenging. "Because I know what it's like to feel invisible," Sophie said, staring into her glass of wine. "I spent years working in jobs where no one cared about my ideas, let alone my future. I don't want anyone else to feel that way." Logan nodded slowly. "You remind me of someone I used to know." "Who?" Sophie asked. "Myself," Logan admitted. "Before all of this." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "What happened to that version of you?" Logan hesitated. "He got buried under spreadsheets and bottom lines. But maybe he's still in there somewhere." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the hum of the cafe filling the silence. The turning point came during a high-stakes negotiation with a European supplier. The supplier, emboldened by the company's recent challenges, demanded exorbitant terms to continue their partnership. "This is extortion," Logan said during the meeting, his frustration evident. "Perhaps," the supplier replied. "But you're not exactly in a position to negotiate, are you?" Sophie, sensing an opportunity, leaned forward. "Actually, we are. Your reputation depends on partnerships with companies like ours. If this deal falls through, it won't just hurt us, it'll hurt you too." The supplier faltered, caught off guard by her boldness. After the meeting, Logan pulled Sophie aside. "That was risky," he said, his tone both admiring and exasperated. "And effective," Sophie replied. Logan chuckled. "You're impossible. You know that?" "Maybe," Sophie said, smiling. As they walked back to their hotel, the tension between them shifted. It wasn't gone, but it felt different. Sophie was reviewing feedback reports in her New York office when the first headline hit her phone. "Exclusive, Blake Industries CEO linked to past ethical violations." The accompanying article detailed alleged misconduct from years prior, focusing on the company's supply chain practices under Logan's leadership. While much of the information wasn't new, the leak included confidential emails that gave the accusations a fresh sting. Sophie felt her stomach churn. She immediately checked her inbox, hoping for clarification from Logan or the PR team. Nothing. Minutes later, Greg appeared at her desk, his expression grim. "Logan wants to see you. Now!" Logan's office was tense, the blinds drawn against the mid-morning sun. He stood by the window, his back to Sophie, his posture rigid. "Is it true?" Sophie asked, breaking the silence. "That depends on what you're asking," Logan replied, turning to face her. "The emails," Sophie pressed. "Did you know about this?" Logan exhaled, his frustration evident. "Some of the practices happened under my watch. But it's not as simple as the article makes it sound. Those decisions weren't mine alone." Sophie frowned, sensing something he wasn't saying. "Then why is your name all over this?" Before Logan could respond, Greg entered with more bad news. "The board has called an emergency meeting. Investors are pulling out faster than we can track." Sophie felt the weight of the situation. The company she had worked so hard to rebuild was unraveling. The emergency board meeting was chaos from the start. Marcus Green wasted no time pouncing on the opportunity. "This is exactly what I warned you about," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the room. "This company can't survive with a leader whose credibility is in shreds." Logan glared at Marcus, but remained silent. Sophie finally spoke. "Pointing fingers won't solve anything. We need to focus on the facts." Who leaked the emails and why? Marcus smirked. Perhaps we should ask you, Ms. Carter. After all, you've been quite invested in transparency lately. The accusation hung in the air. Sophie's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice steady. If you think I would sabotage this company, you clearly don't know me. Logan's eyes flicked toward her, unreadable. Sophie left the boardroom determined to clear her name and find the real culprit. She began combing through internal communications, looking for any signs of unusual activity. Late that night, she found a series of encrypted emails between an anonymous source and a journalist. With Greg's help, she traced the source back to Charles Whitmore, a rival investor who had been circling Blake Industries for months. Sophie printed the evidence and brought it straight to Logan's office. "It's Whitmore," she said, dropping the folder on his desk. Logan flipped through the pages, his expression darkening. "This explains a lot." Sophie crossed her arms. "You're welcome." Logan looked up, guilt flickering in his eyes. "I should have trusted you." "You should have," Sophie replied, her tone colder than she intended. Armed with the evidence against Whitmore, Logan and Sophie strategized their next move. They decided to present the findings to the board, hoping to unite them against the external threat. "We need to show strength," Logan said during a late-night meeting in Sophie's office. "Strength is one thing," Sophie countered, "but we also need to show accountability. If we try to brush this off, we'll lose what little trust we have left." Logan nodded reluctantly. "You're right." The board meeting the next day was tense. Logan began by addressing the leaked emails, taking responsibility for his role in the company's past missteps. "I won't make excuses," Logan said, his voice steady, "but I will make changes. We've already begun implementing reforms, and we will continue to do so." Sophie then presented the evidence against Whitmore, detailing his attempts to destabilize the company. "This isn't just about Blake Industries," Sophie said, her voice ringing with conviction. "It's about standing up to unethical practices in every form, even when they come from outside our walls." The board voted unanimously to expel Whitmore from all dealings with the company and report his actions to the authorities. Later that evening, Logan found Sophie in the break room, staring out the window with a coffee mug in hand. "You saved us," Logan said quietly. "Did I?" Sophie replied, her tone distant. "Or did I just buy us more time?" Logan stepped closer. "You're being too hard on yourself." Sophie turned to face him, her eyes filled with frustration. "And you're not being hard enough. This whole mess happened because of choices you made, choices that hurt people." Logan's expression tightened. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm trying to fix them." "Then prove it," Sophie said, brushing past him and leaving the room. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Sophie and Logan worked tirelessly to rebuild the company's reputation, implementing a new code of conduct and increasing transparency with employees and investors. The changes weren't without resistance. Marcus continued to grumble, and some investors remained wary. But Sophie's leadership began to shine, earning the trust of those who had doubted her. Logan, meanwhile, took a step back, allowing Sophie to lead the charge. "You're better at this than I am," he admitted during a quiet moment in her office. "Maybe," Sophie said with a faint smile, "but you're still needed." The turning point came at a high-profile press conference where Logan and Sophie unveiled the company's new vision. Logan opened the event with a speech that was equal parts apology and promise. "We've made mistakes," he said, "but today, we're taking a stand to ensure those mistakes aren't repeated." Sophie followed with a detailed presentation of the company's reforms, emphasizing the importance of ethics and sustainability. The audience, a mix of journalists, investors, and employees, responded with cautious optimism. Afterward, Logan pulled Sophie aside. "You were incredible," he said. "Thanks," Sophie replied, her smile genuine. As they stood there, the weight of the past few weeks seemed to lift, leaving only the unspoken connection between them. The fallout from the press conference lingered, but the tide began to turn. Blake Industries was no longer on the defensive. Its leadership was proactive, transparent, and determined. Investors who had distanced themselves started to trickle back, cautiously optimistic about the new direction. Sophie, however, felt the weight of the work growing heavier by the day. Long hours and constant scrutiny left her drained. She often stayed late in her office, reviewing reports or drafting policy updates. One evening, Logan appeared in her doorway. "Still here?" "Still here," Sophie replied without looking up. Logan stepped inside, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you could use this." "Thanks," Sophie said, taking the cup but keeping her eyes on her screen. Logan hesitated, then asked, "Are you okay?" Sophie finally looked at him, her exhaustion evident. "I'm fine. Just tired." "You've been carrying a lot of this on your shoulders," Logan said, his tone unusually gentle. "You don't have to do it alone." Sophie set her coffee down, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Is that your way of saying you're finally ready to share the workload?" Logan smirked. "Something like that." Logan and Sophie agreed to meet with a group of key stakeholders to present their updated 5-year plan. The meeting was critical. It would determine whether the company could secure the support it needed to fully recover. The room buzzed with quiet conversation as Logan began his presentation, detailing the company's financial recovery and operational changes. He spoke with confidence, but the room's energy shifted when Sophie took the floor. Her presentation was passionate and forward-thinking, focusing on the human side of business. She shared success stories from employees who had benefited from the engagement programs, emphasizing the company's commitment to its workforce. "This isn't just about profits," Sophie concluded. "It's about creating a company we can all be proud of, one that leads with integrity." The room erupted in applause, and even Marcus, who had remained skeptical, nodded in approval. After the meeting, Benjamin Clark, the progressive investor, approached them. "You two make quite the team," Benjamin said with a smile. Sophie glanced at Logan, unsure how to respond. "We do," Logan said simply, his gaze lingering on Sophie. Just as things seemed to stabilize, another challenge emerged. A journalist published an exposé accusing Blake Industries of exaggerating its recent successes. The article cited anonymous sources claiming the company's recovery was a facade. Logan called an emergency meeting, his frustration evident. "This is ridiculous," he said, slamming the article onto the table. "We've been nothing but transparent." "Which is why this will blow over," Sophie said, her voice calm. "The facts are on our side." Logan looked at her, his expression softening. "I hope you're right." To counter the article, Sophie suggested hosting a live Q&A session where employees, investors, and the public could ask questions directly. "It's risky," Marcus said, frowning. "It's necessary," Sophie replied. "If we want to prove we have nothing to hide, we have to face the criticism head-on." The Q&A session was held in the company's main auditorium and streamed live. Logan opened the event, addressing the accusations with composure. "These claims are unfounded," he said, "and we're here to provide answers." Sophie fielded the first few questions, her calm demeanor winning over the audience. One employee asked about the company's commitment to ethical practices, and Sophie responded with specific examples of the reforms they had implemented. As the session progressed, a particularly aggressive journalist questioned Logan directly. "Mr. Blake, how can we trust the CEO who allowed unethical practices to happen in the first place?" The room tensed, and all eyes turned to Logan. He paused, then spoke with a rare vulnerability. "You're right to ask that question," Logan said. "I made mistakes, but I've learned from them, and I'm committed to doing better. This company isn't about me, it's about the people who work here and the values we stand for." Sophie watched him, her respect for him growing in that moment. After the successful Q&A session, Sophie and Logan found themselves alone in the empty auditorium. "You were incredible up there," Logan said. "So were you," Sophie replied. Logan smiled, his expression softening. "You've changed this company, Sophie, and you've changed me." Sophie felt her heart skip a beat. "I couldn't have done it without you." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the past months settling between them. Then, without thinking, Logan stepped closer. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this," he began, his voice low. "But I think you already know." Sophie looked up at him, her breath catching. "Logan." Before she could finish, he kissed her a slow, deliberate kiss that spoke of everything they had left unsaid. This time, Sophie didn't pull away. The next day, Sophie and Logan returned to work with a renewed sense of purpose. Their relationship, while still undefined, had brought a new layer of trust and partnership to their dynamic. Marcus, noticing the shift, approached Sophie in the break room. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" he said, his tone less hostile than usual. "Is that a compliment, Marcus?" Sophie asked, raising an eyebrow. "Don't let it go to your head," he replied, though a faint smile tugged at his lips. Sophie and Logan's kiss had shifted something fundamental between them. For the first time, their personal connection felt as strong as their professional partnership. But they both knew that navigating this new territory would require balance. At the next board meeting, Logan addressed the group with newfound energy. "Blake Industries is at a turning point," he began. "Our success will depend on unity both within this room and across the company." Sophie followed with a presentation on the final phase of the engagement program, which would expand to every department by the end of the quarter. When the meeting ended, Benjamin Clark approached them with a sly smile. "You two make quite the dynamic duo," he said. Sophie exchanged a glance with Logan, her cheeks flushing. "It's all about teamwork," she replied, keeping her tone professional. As the company began implementing its new initiatives, Charles Whitmore reappeared, this time attempting to rally smaller investors to vote against Logan's leadership. "He doesn't give up, does he?" Sophie said after reading the latest reports. "Bullies like Whitmore thrive on chaos," Logan replied. "We need to stay ahead of him." Together, they developed a plan to preempt Whitmore's moves. Logan focused on reinforcing the company's financial stability, while Sophie worked on a campaign to strengthen employee and investor confidence. The campaign featured testimonials from employees who had benefited from the engagement programs, paired with a transparent financial report detailing the company's progress. "This is brilliant," Logan said after reviewing the materials. Sophie smiled. "I had a good teacher." The annual Investor Gala returned, this time framed as a celebration of the company's recovery. Sophie and Logan prepared meticulously, knowing the event would be scrutinized by both allies and skeptics. The night of the gala, Sophie wore a sleek navy dress that exuded confidence. Logan offered her his arm as they entered the ballroom together. The event began with speeches from key stakeholders, but the highlight was Sophie's presentation. She spoke passionately about the company's transformation, emphasizing the importance of integrity and innovation. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Even Marcus stood, clapping begrudgingly. As the crowd dispersed, Logan pulled Sophie aside. "You've officially won them over," he said. "I couldn't have done it without you," Sophie replied. Logan's expression softened. "I mean it, Sophie. You're the reason we've gotten this far." Just when things seemed to be stabilizing, Whitmore made his boldest move yet. He filed a lawsuit against Blake Industries, accusing the company of misrepresentation during the whistleblower scandal. "This is a stunt," Logan said, throwing the lawsuit onto his desk. "He's trying to scare the board into turning against us." "Then we don't give him the chance," Sophie replied. "We counter with facts publicly." Sophie and Logan hosted a press conference, presenting clear evidence that refuted Whitmore's claims. They highlighted the company's recent successes, bolstered by testimonials from employees and partners. The strategy worked. Whitmore's lawsuit was dismissed, and his reputation suffered a significant blow. With Whitmore out of the picture, Sophie and Logan finally had room to breathe. They spent a rare, quiet evening in Logan's office, reflecting on everything they had endured. "You've changed this company," Logan said, pouring them each a glass of wine. "And you've changed me," Sophie replied. They clinked glasses, the weight of the past year lifting slightly. "What's next?" Sophie asked. Logan smiled. "For the company or for us?" "Both," Sophie said, her voice soft. Logan reached across the desk, taking her hand. "I think we'll figure it out together." Months later, with the company thriving, Logan invited Sophie to a private dinner at a rooftop restaurant. The view of the city skyline was breathtaking, but Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that something more was happening. As dessert was served, Logan stood and reached into his pocket. "Sophie," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "You've been my partner in every way that matters. You've challenged me, supported me, and made me a better man." He knelt, holding out a small velvet box. "Will you marry me?" Sophie's breath caught, tears springing to her eyes. "Yes, Logan," she said, her voice trembling. Yes. The wedding was held in a lush garden, surrounded by friends, family, and colleagues. Sophie wore a simple yet elegant gown, while Logan looked dashing in a tailored suit. Their vows were heartfelt and deeply personal. Sophie, Logan said, his voice steady, you've taught me what it means to lead with heart. I promise to stand by your side, through every challenge and every triumph. Logan, Sophie replied, her voice thick with emotion, you've shown me that strength comes from trust. I promise to support you, challenge you, and build a life we can both be proud of. As they kissed, the guests erupted into cheers, and the weight of their journey melted away. Months after their wedding, Sophie and Logan continued to lead Blake Industries together. The company had become a model of ethical leadership and innovation, with Sophie's engagement programs replicated across the industry. One evening, as they reviewed reports in their shared office, Logan looked up and smiled. Do you ever think about how far we've come? He asked. Every day, Sophie replied. They clinked coffee mugs, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead together. Months after their wedding, Sophie and Logan had settled into a rhythm. Their partnership was stronger than ever, both professionally and personally. Blake Industries was thriving, with Sophie's engagement programs now fully integrated across every department. Quarterly reports are in, Sophie said during a meeting with Logan and the executive team. Employee retention is up by 25%, and productivity has increased across all divisions. Benjamin Clark, who had become one of their staunchest allies, smiled. This is what happens when you invest in people. Even Marcus, who had been one of Sophie's harshest critics, nodded in agreement. I'll admit, I wasn't sure about all of this at first, but you proved me wrong. Sophie exchanged a glance with Logan, a small smile passing between them. As Blake Industries celebrated its successes, whispers of a new challenge emerged. A tech startup, Horizon Innovations, began making waves in the industry with cutting-edge software that threatened to disrupt Blake Industries' supply chain operations. This could be a problem, Logan said during a strategy meeting. Sophie reviewed the data. We need to adapt. If we integrate similar technology into our systems, we'll stay ahead. Logan nodded. Let's meet with their team. If we can't outpace them, maybe we can collaborate. The meeting was set for the following week, but tensions were high. Logan and Sophie knew this was more than just a technological challenge. It was a test of their ability to innovate in a rapidly changing landscape. Horizon Innovation CEO, a young and ambitious woman named Claire Mitchell, greeted Sophie and Logan warmly. We've been watching Blake Industries for a while, Claire said. Your focus on ethics and employee engagement is inspiring. Sophie smiled. And your technology is impressive. I think we could learn from each other. Logan, however, was more cautious. Collaboration is a big step. What would you propose? Claire outlined a plan to integrate Horizon software into Blake Industries operations, offering a joint venture that would benefit both companies. After the meeting, Sophie and Logan debriefed. I think it's a great opportunity, Sophie said. Logan frowned. It's risky. What if they use this as a way to take control? Then we ensure the terms protect us, Sophie countered. Logan, we need to evolve. This is how we do it. Logan studied her for a moment before nodding. All right, let's give it a shot. The joint venture was announced to the public, and the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Employees and investors alike praised the move as a bold step toward innovation. Sophie worked closely with Claire to integrate the software, and the two developed a mutual respect. You're lucky to have Logan as a partner, Claire said during one of their meetings. Sophie smiled. He's lucky to have me too. Just as the collaboration seemed to be gaining momentum, a technical glitch in the new software caused delays in the supply chain. Several orders were late, and complaints began to pile up. We need to address this immediately, Logan said during an emergency meeting. Sophie agreed. I'll coordinate with Claire's team to resolve the issue. Despite their efforts, the delays continued, and media outlets began questioning whether the collaboration was a mistake. This isn't just about the software, Sophie said during a late-night brainstorming session with Logan. It's about communication. We need to show that we're on top of this. Logan nodded. Then let's do it. Sophie and Logan hosted a town hall meeting with employees, addressing their concerns and outlining their plan to fix the issues. They also released a public statement, taking responsibility for the delays and promising transparency moving forward. The move earned praise for its honesty, and slowly, trust began to rebuild. By the end of the quarter, the glitches were resolved, and the collaboration was back on track. Blake Industries had not only weathered the storm, but emerged stronger. Months later, Sophie and Logan stood on the balcony of their Manhattan apartment, looking out over the city. "We've been through a lot," Logan said, his arm around Sophie's shoulders. "And we're still standing," Sophie replied with a smile. Logan looked at her, his expression serious. "Sophie, I want to make a promise. No matter what challenges come our way, we'll face them together." Sophie nodded, her eyes shining. "Always." As the year drew to a close, Blake Industries celebrated its most successful quarter yet. The collaboration with Horizon Innovations had opened new doors, and the company's reputation as a leader in ethical business practices was firmly cemented. During the company's annual holiday party, Sophie and Logan took the stage together to address the employees. "This success belongs to all of you," Sophie said, her voice filled with gratitude. "And we're just getting started," Logan added, his tone confident. The room erupted into cheers, a testament to the trust and loyalty they had built. Years later, Sophie and Logan looked back on their journey with pride. They had built more than just a successful company, they had created a legacy of integrity, innovation, and resilience. As they sat together in their office, reviewing the latest reports, Logan turned to Sophie and smiled. "You know," he said, "you're the best decision I ever made." Sophie laughed, leaning into him. "I know." Together, they raised their coffee mugs, ready for whatever the future held. If you enjoyed Sophie and Logan's journey through challenges, growth, and love, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. From tales of resilience and transformation to moments that remind us of the power of human connection, we bring you stories that inspire and move. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this story with others who might need a little inspiration today. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest releases. We can't wait to share more amazing stories with you.